Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California, during a time when the world of technology was just beginning to wake up. His biological parents, Joanne Schiebel, an American student, and Abdul Fattah Jandali, a Syrian student, were young, uncertain, and under heavy pressure from their families. Their relationship was complicated, and raising a child was something they were not prepared for. With heavy hearts, they decided to place the newborn baby for adoption, hoping he would find a home capable of giving him a stable and loving future. They had no idea that the child they were giving away would one day lead a technological revolution. Steve was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, a modest middle-class couple living in Mountain View, California. Paul was a calm, patient man who worked as a mechanic and craftsman. Clara was warm, organized, and deeply caring. They couldn't give Steve luxury, but they gave him something far more important, a peaceful home filled with love and attention. Steve quickly bonded with them, and even though he knew he was adopted, he always said he felt chosen, not abandoned. This sense of being chosen gave him a quiet confidence that shaped how he saw himself and the world around him. From an early age, Steve showed unusual curiosity. He wasn't the kind of child who simply played with toys. He opened them, examined their parts, and tried to understand how things worked internally. His father noticed this curiosity and decided to nurture it instead of stopping him. Paul would take Steve to the garage and let him sit by his workbench. There, he taught Steve how to use tools, how circuits worked, how machines could be repaired, and most importantly, how to take pride in craftsmanship. Paul believed that even the parts people couldn't see should be built beautifully. This philosophy of inner perfection deeply influenced Steve's future design standards at Apple. In school, however, Steve was not an easy student. He was intelligent but restless, creative but easily bored. Teachers saw him as a troublemaker because he constantly questioned rules, challenged ideas, and refused to do things just because everyone else does it. He wasn't there to memorize answers, he was there to explore life with his own mind. His mischief often overshadowed his brilliance, and it wasn't until 4th grade that a teacher named Imogene Hill recognized his potential. She encouraged him, pushed him, and sparked a fire inside him for learning. Under her guidance, Steve advanced academically so quickly that he was moved ahead a grade, which made him even more of an outsider but strengthened his independence. During Steve's growing years, something extraordinary was happening around him. Silicon Valley was beginning to rise. New companies, new electronics, and new ideas were everywhere. When Steve joined the HP Explorer Club, he was fascinated watching engineers demonstrate the newest technologies of that era. It was like witnessing magic that only he could truly appreciate. These early experiences made him believe that technology was not just machines or wires, it was a form of art, a tool that could shape the future. By age 12, Steve was brave enough to call Bill Hewlett, the founder of Hewlett-Packard, asking for spare parts for a school project. Bill not only gave him the parts. He also offered Steve a summer job. This was the beginning of Steve's unique boldness, the courage to ask, the courage to try, and the courage to believe he could achieve anything. As he entered his teenage years, Steve developed a fascinating mix of interests. He was drawn to electronics but also to art, philosophy, meditation, and spiritual exploration. He wasn't satisfied with seeing life in just one dimension. He wanted to combine logic with intuition, technology with beauty, and science with human emotion. This blend would later become the essence of Apple's identity. Steve Jobs' early life was simple, quiet, and full of curiosity. There were no hints that he would one day change the world. But the seeds were planted, the adoption that made him feel chosen, the father who taught him craftsmanship, the mother who taught him stability, the teachers who challenged him, and the environment of Silicon Valley that surrounded him with innovation. All these pieces came together like parts of a machine, gradually building the foundation of a revolutionary mind. As Steve Jobs grew into his childhood, his personality became more defined, sharp, curious, restless, and full of questions that most children his age never even thought of. He had a mind that refused to simply accept things as they were. Instead, he wanted to understand why things existed, how they worked, and what could be different. This mindset made him fascinating, but also difficult for the traditional school system to handle. Teachers often found him disruptive, not because he lacked intelligence, but because he thought too fast, too differently, and too intensely for the slow rhythm of ordinary classrooms. At school, Steve would finish lessons quickly and then drift off into his imagination. He wasn't interested in repeating facts, he wanted challenges that made his mind wake up. When teachers couldn't provide that, he entertained himself by playing harmless pranks, sometimes clever, sometimes annoying, but always showing the spark of a creative mind looking for stimulation. His classmates often misunderstood him, but Steve didn't care. He wasn't trying to fit in, he was trying to explore the world in his own way. Everything began to change when Steve reached 4th grade and met the teacher who would become one of the most important influences of his childhood, Imogen Hill, known lovingly as Teddy. She saw what others failed to see. She recognized Steve's hunger for knowledge and his need for mental freedom. Instead of punishing him, she challenged him with difficult tasks, complex puzzles, and creative assignments. She rewarded his curiosity, supported his intensity, and treated him not as a troublemaker, but as a gifted child with unusual potential. Steve would later say that this was the moment when he truly began to love learning. Under her guidance, he transformed from a restless student into a focused thinker. His academic growth became so fast that Steve was moved ahead a grade. But this created a new kind of struggle. He was smaller, younger, and surrounded by peers who didn't share his interests. This made him more of an outsider. Still, Steve learned to be comfortable in his uniqueness. These early experiences taught him that being different was not a weakness, it was a superpower. He learned to rely on his own mind, his own intuition, and his own ideas, even when others didn't understand him. Meanwhile, the environment around him was shaping him in ways he could not fully grasp. Silicon Valley was evolving into the world's innovation hub. Engineers, inventors, and dreamers lived all around him. Technology companies were growing like trees in spring, and young Steve was right in the middle of that garden. He became fascinated with the idea of electronics, not the dry theory, but the magic behind them. Radios, wires, circuits, they weren't just objects to Steve, they were puzzles waiting to be unlocked. When Steve joined the HP Explorer Club, he was completely mesmerized. This club allowed young students to witness real engineers working on early computers and scientific equipment. Steve saw machines that could compute, display data, make sounds, and do things he never imagined. The moment he watched those demonstrations, something clicked inside him. He realized that technology was not scary or complex, it was alive. It had personality, potential, and the ability to change human lives. That moment was the silent beginning of Steve's lifelong bond with technology. His curiosity became so bold that one day, at age 12, he picked up the phone, dialed the number of Bill Hewlett, the founder of Hewlett-Packard, and asked him for spare electronic parts for a school project. Bill Hewlett, amused and impressed, gave him the parts, and even a summer job. This fearless initiative became a trademark of Steve's personality. Later in life, he would use the same boldness to negotiate contracts, recruit talent, and pitch innovative ideas that no one else dared to imagine. Beyond technology, Steve's personality continued to evolve. He became deeply interested in art, drawing, meditation, and philosophy. He wasn't just trying to build machines, he was trying to understand the essence of life. He read about spirituality, practiced intuition, and explored new ways of thinking. He felt connected to the beauty of nature, silence, and creativity. This early mix of technology and art shaped his unique identity, a blend that later became the soul of Apple. Steve was also influenced by the growing wave of cultural change around him: rock music, anti-war movements, free-thinking communities, and artistic expression. He absorbed everything, forming his own worldviews. He began to believe that life wasn't supposed to be lived according to society's rules, it was supposed to be created, designed, shaped by your own imagination. By the time Steve entered his teenage years, he had grown into a complex, independent thinker. He had the rebellious mind of an artist and the curious mind of an engineer. He was still misunderstood, still restless, still searching, but he was also quietly preparing himself for something extraordinary. His early struggles were not failures, they were training. His questions were not distractions, they were foundations. His rebelliousness was not a flaw, it was the fuel that would soon lead him to change the world. Every great visionary needs the right partner, and for Steve Jobs, that person was Steve Wozniak, a talented, quiet, and intensely creative engineer. Wozniak, or Woz as everyone called him, was older, introverted, and loved building things just for the joy of it. Where Steve Jobs had imagination, boldness, and vision, Wozniak had the skills, precision, and technical brilliance to bring those ideas into reality. The two met through mutual friends in the early 1970s, and the connection was immediate. Steve was drawn to Woz's ingenuity, and Woz was fascinated by Steve's charisma and relentless energy. They complemented each other perfectly. Steve could dream big, convince others to believe in the impossible, and push boundaries, while Wozniak could engineer, invent, and create the very machines that made those dreams tangible. Their first collaborations were playful, rebellious, and creative. One of their earliest joint projects was the Blue Box, a small device that allowed people to make free long-distance phone calls. To many, it was just a fun prank, a technical trick. But to Steve, it was more than that, it was a proof that innovation could be combined with ingenuity, boldness, and vision. Together, they realized that technology was not just for academics or engineers, it could empower anyone. That small blue box was their first taste of entrepreneurship, showing them that ideas could become real products that people wanted. As their friendship deepened, Steve and Woz spent countless hours tinkering in garages, on kitchen tables, and in small workshop spaces. They shared not only technical knowledge but also philosophy, art, and culture. Steve's restless mind combined with Wozniak's methodical approach created a perfect storm of innovation. They would joke, argue, experiment, and even fail multiple times, but through every failure, they learned, adapted, and grew stronger. Steve was fascinated by how Wozniak could take abstract concepts and transform them into working devices with elegance and precision. Woz, in turn, admired Steve's relentless drive, his vision, and his ability to see opportunities where others saw none. Together, they became more than friends, they became a creative force, the kind that could change industries. This partnership also marked a turning point in Steve's personal journey. Before meeting Woz, Steve had ideas but no technical mastery. He could imagine revolutionary computers but couldn't build them himself. Woz provided the missing piece. He was the hands to Steve's imagination, the engineer to Steve's visionary mind. They spent hours discussing personal computing, the future of technology, and how people would interact with machines. Steve began to see that computing wasn't just for scientists or large corporations, it could be personal, accessible, and beautiful. He envisioned a future where everyone, from artists to students, could use computers to unleash creativity. That vision would become the core of Apple's mission. By the mid-1970s, the partnership matured. Steve and Woz began planning something bigger than pranks or small gadgets. They dreamt of creating personal computers, machines that could fit on a desk, be simple to use, and have an elegant design. Steve's business sense combined with Woz's technical genius created a powerful synergy. They were young, ambitious, and slightly reckless, but they had a purpose, a mission, and a shared belief that they could change the world. Little did anyone know that this friendship, born out of curiosity, mutual admiration, and a hunger for innovation, would lead to the creation of one of the most influential technology companies in history, Apple Inc. By the end of this phase, Steve Jobs had learned some crucial lessons. Vision alone was not enough, he needed partners, people who could complement his strengths and cover his weaknesses. Boldness could take you far, but collaboration could take you further. And most importantly, innovation was not just technical, it was a combination of art, design, philosophy, and human understanding. With Woz by his side, Steve's dream of personal computing was no longer a distant idea, it was a tangible reality waiting to be built, marketed, and shared with the world. Steve Jobs' journey was moving from curiosity to collaboration, from imagination to practical creation, and from a dreamer to a young visionary ready to take the next step, founding Apple and revolutionizing the way humans interacted with technology. By 1976, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were ready to take the leap from tinkering to entrepreneurship. They shared a vision that computers should not be confined to large corporations or laboratories, they should belong to individuals, be accessible, and empower creativity. With that belief, they decided to create their own company, Apple Computer. The setting was humble, a small garage in Steve's parents' home in Los Altos, California. There were no fancy offices, no investors, and no big staff, just two young men with a dream, a few tools, and a growing determination to change the world. The first product they built was the Apple I. Unlike modern computers, it was not a complete, polished machine, it was essentially a single circuit board. But it was functional, and most importantly, it had potential. Steve Jobs' role went beyond technical involvement, he had an instinct for design and marketing. He understood that people would not just buy a computer for its technical features, they would buy it because it felt intuitive, elegant, and exciting. He convinced a local computer store to purchase 50 units, and that initial sale became the first real proof that their idea could work in the marketplace. The Apple I's success allowed them to plan bigger, and soon, they started working on the Apple II. Apple II was revolutionary. It was one of the first fully assembled personal computers with color graphics, easy-to-use design, and a friendly interface. It was simple enough for ordinary people to use, yet powerful enough to handle serious work. Its success was immediate. Apple transformed from a small garage project into a company that began attracting attention from investors, the media, and the emerging tech community. Within a few years, Apple was generating millions in revenue, and Steve Jobs, in his mid-20s, had become a millionaire. But wealth was never his primary goal. For Steve, the focus was always on creation, innovation, and impact. Money was secondary, influence and vision were primary. The garage itself became a legendary symbol of innovation. It was cramped, noisy, and filled with electronic components, tools, and the scent of solder and metal. Nights were long, and the work was exhausting, but Steve thrived in the chaos. He could see beyond the clutter to the possibilities of technology, imagining computers in homes, schools, and offices worldwide. Every soldered wire, every connected circuit was a step toward a larger dream, changing how humans interacted with machines. The success of Apple I and Apple II also taught Steve important lessons about leadership. He realized that innovation required not just ideas, but people. He needed talent, collaborators, and believers who shared his vision. This understanding shaped his approach to hiring, mentoring, and motivating teams. He became known as a demanding leader, but one whose intensity inspired breakthroughs that ordinary management methods could never achieve. By the end of these formative years, Apple had grown far beyond the garage in physical size and ambition. It had established a new category, personal computing. And Steve Jobs had grown from a curious, rebellious teenager into a young entrepreneur with vision, drive, and an understanding of how to blend technology, design, and human experience. The foundation of Apple was more than a company, it was a movement, one that would soon set the stage for the next phase of Jobs' journey, the Macintosh, breakthrough innovation, and the challenges of rising fame. Steve Jobs' story in the garage is a testament to how vision, creativity, collaboration, and relentless determination can transform humble beginnings into a platform for revolutionizing the world. From that small home workspace, a global empire was quietly taking its first, transformative steps. After Apple's initial success with the Apple II, Steve Jobs' ambitions grew even larger. He was no longer content with simply building functional computers, he wanted to create something magical, revolutionary, and personal. That vision led to the development of the Macintosh, a project that would forever change the way humans interacted with technology. Steve imagined a computer that anyone could use, not just engineers or hobbyists, a computer that was intuitive, beautiful, and inspiring. He wanted it to have a graphical interface, icons, and a mouse, something no one else had ever imagined for the average person. The Macintosh was not just a technical innovation, it was a philosophical statement: technology could be human. Simple and empowering, developing the Macintosh was both thrilling and exhausting. Steve pushed his team to their limits, demanding perfection in design, function, and even the smallest details that most people would never notice. He was famously intense, often clashing with engineers and designers over choices in color, shape, and typography. He wanted a product that would not just work but feel alive, a machine that carried elegance and simplicity at its core. His perfectionism created tension, and not everyone could keep up with his vision. But those who could were inspired to deliver breakthroughs that otherwise might have seemed impossible. The launch of the Macintosh in 1984 was an extraordinary moment in tech history. Apple released the iconic 1984 commercial during the Super Bowl, signaling the arrival of a computer that was unlike anything the world had seen. The Macintosh was a combination of engineering brilliance and artistic design. People were fascinated by the clean interface, the friendly icons, and the ease of use. Steve Jobs became a public figure almost overnight, celebrated as a visionary and pioneer. His charisma, confidence, and ability to tell a story about technology made him both admired and feared. He wasn't just selling a product, he was selling a vision of the future, but fame came with new challenges. Steve's intense personality, which had previously fueled creativity and innovation, now led to conflict with Apple's board of directors and executives. Some considered him too difficult, too uncompromising, and too unpredictable for a company growing at such an unprecedented pace. His drive for perfection often clashed with the demands of running a large organization, and tensions escalated. Even though the Macintosh had gained praise and attention, Steve found himself increasingly isolated from decision-making at Apple. In 1985, a dramatic turn of events occurred. John Sculley, the CEO that Steve had personally hired years earlier, and the Apple board pushed Steve Jobs out of the company he had founded. At just 30 years old, he was removed from his own creation. For many, this would have been devastating. Jobs described the experience as painful, humiliating, and surreal. Yet, in his own way, he transformed this setback into a moment of liberation. He later reflected that being fired allowed him to experience freedom, to start fresh, and to reimagine what he could create without the constraints of a massive corporation. This period, while emotionally difficult, was also a pivotal moment for Steve Jobs. It forced him to reflect, to grow, and to explore new possibilities. He realized that creativity, vision, and determination could not be confined to one company. He learned lessons about leadership, resilience, and the importance of surrounding himself with the right team and environment. The firing, rather than ending his story, marked the beginning of a new chapter, one that would lead him to even greater innovations, ventures, and ultimately, a historic return to Apple itself. Steve Jobs' journey during the Macintosh era teaches a profound lesson: that innovation often comes with conflict, that vision can be misunderstood, and that true pioneers are sometimes pushed to the margins before transforming the world. Despite the setbacks, his belief in combining technology with beauty, simplicity, and humanity remained unwavering. And even outside Apple, the seeds of his future genius were quietly growing, ready to bloom in ways no one could yet imagine. Steve Jobs' life was often defined by his vision, innovation, and public persona as a demanding, intense, and sometimes controversial figure. But behind the headlines and the revolutionary technology, there was another side of Steve, the side that existed in love, family, and personal connection. That side became more visible when he met Laureen Powell, the woman who would become his wife, partner, and mother of his children. Laureen was a strong, intelligent, and independent woman, with a sharp mind, compassion, and a sense of balance that complemented Steve's intensity. They met in 1989 at Stanford Graduate School of Business, where Laureen was a student and Steve was invited as a guest speaker to talk about innovation and entrepreneurship. According to Laureen, Steve was charismatic, magnetic, and deeply passionate about his vision, but there was also vulnerability, curiosity, and a profound intelligence that went far beyond the public figure everyone knew. They connected immediately, not just on an emotional level, but intellectually, sharing ideas, debates, and visions about life, business, and the future. Their courtship was a blend of mutual respect, fascination, and humor. Steve, who had always been intense and sometimes emotionally distant, found in Lorene a partner who could challenge him gently while offering grounding and perspective. Lorene described him as a man who could be completely absorbed in ideas and work, yet capable of immense warmth, curiosity, and emotional depth when he let his guard down. Their early relationship involved long discussions about life, technology, and family values, as well as shared quiet moments that were private, peaceful, and removed from the glare of public attention. Steve Jobs' life was more than a story of technology, innovation, or business. It was a story of vision, courage, and the relentless pursuit of excellence. From a curious, adopted child in San Francisco to a rebellious teenager, a visionary entrepreneur, and a world-changing innovator, Steve's journey was marked by imagination, failures, comebacks, and a constant drive to make the world better. He taught us that innovation is not just about creating new devices, it's about seeing the world differently, challenging conventions, and believing that one person can make a difference. Even in his final years, when illness threatened his life, Steve remained committed to ideas, creation, and purpose. He never let fear define him. Instead, he focused on making an impact that would outlast him. The products he built, Apple, Pixar, iPhone, iPad, iPod, were not just tools, they were extensions of his philosophy: simplicity, elegance, human-centered design, and the belief that technology should enhance life, not complicate it. His vision reshaped multiple industries: computing, animation, music, communication, and inspired countless people to think differently, to dream bigger, and to embrace creativity in every field. Steve Jobs' legacy is also deeply personal. His relationship with his wife Lorene and his children shows that even the busiest visionary understands the value of family, love, and human connection. His life reminds us that success is not only measured by wealth or fame, but by the lives we touch, the ideas we share, and the courage to remain authentic, even when the world doubts us. Perhaps the most enduring lesson Steve leaves us is summed up in his own words: stay hungry. Stay foolish. To remain curious, to question everything, to take risks, and to never settle, these were the principles that guided him, and they continue to inspire millions around the globe. Steve Jobs' story is a testament to the power of imagination, resilience, and the human spirit. Even after his passing, his vision lives on, not only in the products we use every day but in the way we approach life, work, and creativity. Steve Jobs may have left this world in 2011, but his ideas, passion, and transformative influence are immortal. He taught us to dream, to innovate, and to see beyond the ordinary. He showed that one person, armed with curiosity, courage, and conviction, can change the world forever. His life reminds us that every challenge is an opportunity, every failure is a lesson, and every idea, no matter how small, has the potential to leave a mark that lasts for generations.